The laughter started when Danny dropped his book that he had been sitting alone in the corner of the barracks, trying to ignore the alien soldiers around him. The outpost on Jarrell 7 was cold, crowded, and filled with species who looked to humans like they were interesting insects. When the old paperback slipped from his fingers and hit the metal floor, every head turned. A swine got there first. The reptilian Dracorii soldier picked up the book with his clawed hand and looked at the cover. His yellow eyes narrowed with amusement. "What is this?" Swine asked, his voice rough like stones grinding together. "Just a book," Danny said quickly. "Can I have it back?" But Swine was already flipping through the pages. Other soldiers gathered around him. There were Kathrani with their insect-like bodies, pale Vorn with 4 arms, and several other species Danny still could not name. They all looked curious. Mythology, Swine read from the cover. Greek and Norse tales. He laughed, showing rows of sharp teeth. The human brought children's stories to a military outpost. "They're not children's stories," Danny said, but his voice was weak. "Let me see." A Kathrani soldier named Finn took the book and read a passage out loud. The hero Achilles was dipped in a river by his mother, making him impossible to kill except at his heel. Finn's mandibles clicked with laughter. "Your species believe this. It's mythology," Danny tried to explain. "It's symbolic. It means something deeper. It means your ancestors were stupid," Swine said. The other aliens laughed. They invented stories about impossible heroes because they were too weak to be heroes themselves. More soldiers came closer. Someone read about Hercules killing a lion with his bare hands. Someone else found the story of Beowulf fighting a monster in the darkness. Each story brought more laughter. "Listen to this," a Vorn soldier said. "This man, named Leonidas, took only 300 soldiers to fight an army of thousands. And they all died." The Vorn shook his head. "Why do humans celebrate failure?" "It wasn't failure," Danny said, his face getting hot. "They held the line. They bought time for others to escape. They died uselessly," Swine said. "A smart commander would have retreated and preserved his forces. But humans worship death. You make heroes out of fools who throw their lives away." Danny opened his mouth to argue, but what could he say? He was 19 years old, fresh from Earth, and these soldiers had been fighting wars for decades. They had technology humans could barely understand. Their civilizations were thousands of years older. "Maybe," Swine continued, "this is why humans needed the Galactic Alliance. You are too emotional to survive on your own. You believe in magic rivers and impossible heroes instead of logic and planning." The aliens laughed again. Danny felt his eyes burn with shame. He wanted to grab his book and run, but that would only make things worse. "The Kathrani have no need for myths," Lieutenant Ryan said. The tall insectoid officer had been watching from across the room. "We have genetic memory. Our ancestors' real achievements live in our blood. We do not need to invent fantasies." The Dracorii were already conquering star systems when humans were living in caves, Swine added. "What were your heroes doing?" "Fighting imaginary monsters with swords." Danny had no answer. He looked down at the floor in the far corner of the barracks. An older human soldier sat alone on his bunk. His name was William Harding, but everyone called him Will. He was maybe 50 years old, with gray in his short hair and scars covering his arms and neck. He never talked much. He never joined conversations. The other humans on the outpost said he had been a soldier longer than most of them had been alive. Will was watching the scene with quiet eyes. His jaw was tight. His hands, resting on his knees, had curled into fists. But he said nothing. "Perhaps," Swine said, walking toward Danny with the book still in his claws. "Humans need these stories because you have nothing real to be proud of. No genetic perfection. No ancient empire. Just dreams of being something more than you are." He dropped the book at Danny's feet. "Enjoy your fantasies, little human. When real war comes, your myths will not save you." The aliens returned to their bunks, still chuckling. Danny picked up his book with shaking hands. The cover was bent now. Some of the pages were torn as he looked over at Will, hoping the older soldier might say something, might defend humanity, might tell these aliens they were wrong. But Will just sat there, staring at nothing, his scarred face unreadable. Lieutenant Ryan walked past Danny on the way to his quarters. The Kathrani officer paused and looked down at the young human. "Do not take it personally," Ryan said. "Every species believes their stories matter, but some stories are just stories, and some species simply have more to prove than others." Danny nodded and said nothing. Later that night, when the barracks were quiet and most soldiers were sleeping, Danny sat on his bunk and opened his torn book. He read about Odysseus trying to get home. He read about Thor fighting giants. He read about ordinary men becoming something more. The stories felt hollow now. Maybe the aliens were right. Maybe humans just needed to believe in heroes because they had never produced any real ones. That eye in the corner, while Harding lay on his bunk with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling. He had not slept well in 15 years. Tonight would be no different. 3 hours after midnight, the sirens began to scream. Danny was out of his bunk before his eyes were fully open. Around him, alien soldiers moved with practiced speed, grabbing weapons and armor. The red emergency lights made everything look like it was covered in blood. Lieutenant Ryan stood at the communications terminal, his insect-like body rigid with tension. The other soldiers gathered around him, waiting for orders. "A Ravager scout force has crossed the ceasefire line," Ryan announced. "They are attacking the Moro settlement. Approximately 200 enemy warriors." Danny felt his stomach drop. He had heard of the Ravagers. Everyone had. They were a species of pure predators, living only to hunt and kill. The Galactic Alliance had been fighting them for decades. The ceasefire was supposed to give both sides time to recover. "Moro settlement has 400 civilians," Ryan continued. "Mostly Kathrani young and their caretakers." "What are our orders?" SYNN asked. The reptilian soldier was already holding his plasma rifle. Ryan was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was flat. "Alliance Command has ordered us to hold position. We are not to engage." Silence filled the barracks. "What?" Danny said. "There are 400 people there. Children. The ceasefire is fragile," Ryan said. "Command believes that if we engage the Ravagers now, it could restart the full war. Billions of lives across the galaxy depend on this peace holding. So we just let them die." Danny could not believe what he was hearing. SYNN stepped forward. "The mathematics are clear, human. 400 deaths to preserve a treaty that protects billions. It is unfortunate, but it is the logical choice." The other alien soldiers nodded. Their faces showed no emotion. To them, this was simple calculation. Numbers on a scale. "This is why humans should not hold command positions," SYNN added. "You are too emotional. You cannot see beyond the immediate tragedy to the larger picture." Danny looked around desperately. The other humans in the barracks looked just as horrified as he felt, but none of them spoke. What could they say? They were outnumbered and outranked. Then a voice came from the corner, low and rough, like a machine that had not been used in years. "How many Ravagers did you say?" Everyone turned. Well, Harding was standing now. He had put on his combat armor while everyone else was talking. His rifle was already in his hands. "Approximately 200, Ryan said. "Why do you ask?" Will nodded slowly. He checked his weapon, then checked it again. His movements were calm and certain. "I'm going," he said simply. The barracks went completely silent. "Sergeant Harding," Ryan said carefully, "you heard my orders. We are not to engage." "I heard." "We'll walk toward the door." "I'm going anyway." "You are one soldier," SYNN said, stepping into his path. "Against 200 Ravagers. That is not heroic. That is suicide." Will looked at the Dracorii with eyes that had seen too much death to fear it anymore. "Probably. You coming?" SYNN stared at him. "You cannot be serious." "Anyone who wants to come can come," Will said to the room. "Anyone who wants to stay here and be logical can do that instead." He paused. "But those are children out there. And where I come from, that means something." He walked past SYNN without another word. Danny did not even think. He grabbed his rifle and followed. 2 other humans, a woman named Sarah and a man named Cole, fell in behind him. "This is madness," SYNN called after them. "You will all die for nothing." Will stopped at the door and looked back. For a moment, his eyes met SYNN's. "Maybe," he said, "but I'll die for something." "What will you die for?" Then he was gone, walking out into the cold night air. Danny hurried to catch up. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Sarah and Cole jogged alongside him, their faces pale but determined. "Sergeant," Danny said as they reached the transport vehicle, "do you really think we can save them? 4 of us against 200. Will climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. "No," he said honestly, "but we can buy time. Every minute we fight is another minute for civilians to hide or escape." "That's not a plan," Sarah said. "That's a death sentence." Will looked at her. In the dim light of the vehicle, his scars seemed deeper, older. Every plan is a death sentence eventually. The only question is what you spend your death on. He pulled the vehicle out of the outpost and into the darkness. Behind them, Lieutenant Rhine stood at the barracks window, watching the transport's lights disappear into the night. His clawed hand was pressed against the glass. "Fools," Swyanin said, coming to stand beside him. "They go to die for strangers, for aliens who mocked them just hours ago." Rhine did not answer. He was thinking about the old human's eyes, the complete absence of fear, the absolute certainty he had seen warriors from 100 species. He had never seen anything like that. "Pull up Sergeant Harding's service record," Rhine said quietly. "Why? He will be dead within the hour." "Pull it up," Swyanin grumbled but walked to the terminal. He entered the request and waited. The screen flashed red. "Access restricted. Clearance level maximum." Both aliens stared at the screen. "What kind of soldier," as Swyanin whispered, "has a record that even officers cannot see?" Rhine had no answer to in the transport heading toward certain death. Danny sat beside the old soldier and tried not to be afraid he was failing. The transport moved through darkness so thick it felt solid. Danny watched the empty landscape pass by through the small window. No lights, no signs of life, just rocks and dust and the distant glow of fires where the settlement was burning. "Sergeant," he said quietly, "can I ask you something?" Will kept his eyes on the path ahead. "Go ahead. Why are you doing this?" "Really?" The older soldier was quiet for a long moment. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the crunch of ground beneath their wheels. "You read those myths," Will finally said. "The ones everyone laughed at. You believe in them." Danny thought about it. "I don't know. I used to. Before tonight, I thought they were just stories. Something to make us feel better about being small. They're not just stories." Will's voice was flat, like he was stating a simple fact. "They're instructions." "Instructions for what?" "For who we have to become. When everything falls apart." We'll turn the transport around a large boulder. I was at Brennan's world. Danny felt his breath catch. He had heard of Brennan's world. Everyone had. It was one of the worst disasters in human colonial history. "You were there?" Sarah asked from the back seat. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I was 22 years old," Will said. "Part of the colonial militia. We had 200 soldiers total. Most of us had never fired a weapon at anything except targets." He paused, his hands tight on the controls. "The Ravagers came with 8,000 warriors. Back then, humans weren't part of the Alliance. Nobody knew we existed. No help was coming. No sheeps. No reinforcements. Just us." "What happened?" Cole asked. "We fought." Will's voice was simple, empty of drama. "We knew we couldn't win. We knew we were going to die. But there were 12,000 civilians in that colony. Women, children, families who came to build a new life on a new world. The fires of the settlement were getting closer now. Danny could see shapes moving in the flames. We held the walls for 11 days. 11 days against 8,000 Ravagers. Every night they attacked. Every morning, there were fewer of us." Will's scarred hands flexed on the controls. By day 4, we had 70 soldiers left. By day 7, 30. By day 10, there were 9 of us still standing. "How did you survive?" Danny asked. "On the 11th day, a trading freighter passed through the system. They picked up our distress signal. They couldn't fight the Ravagers, but they could evacuate civilians. We just had to hold the main gate long enough for them to load the ships." Will finally looked at Danny. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had walked through fire and never fully come back. The others fell at the gate, one by one, until it was just me. I held that gate alone for 6 hours. Nobody spoke. The transport kept moving through the darkness. 3,000 civilians escaped on that freighter, Will said. 9,000 died. 200 militia died. But 3,000 people lived because we decided that dying for strangers was worth more than living for ourselves. The myths, Danny said slowly. Achilles, Leonidas, you're saying they weren't just stories. I'm saying every culture that survives tells the same story. Different names, different details, but the same truth. Will's voice was firm now. One person can hold the line. One person can make a difference. And sometimes that one person is you. Sarah leaned forward. But how do you keep fighting? When you know you're going to die, you don't fight for yourself. You fight for the people behind you. The ones who can't fight. The ones who need one more hour, one more day. Will shook his head. Those aliens back at the outpost, they think sacrifice is illogical. They think dying for others is stupid. But they're wrong. Why? Cole asked. Because they calculate value in numbers. They see 400 civilians and 200 enemies, and they do the math. But humans don't work that way. We see a child in danger, and something inside us switches off. The math stops matching. The only thing that matters is that child needs help, and we can give it. The settlement was right in front of them now. Danny could hear screaming. He could see Ravagers moving between burning buildings. That's not weakness, Will said. That's what makes us human. That's what those myths are really about. Not magic rivers or impossible strength. Just ordinary people who decided that some things are worth dying for. He stopped the transport and checked his rifle one final time. Today, we're going to show those aliens what human myths really mean. We're going to fight against impossible odds. We're going to buy time for those civilians to escape. And some of us might die. He looked at each of them in turn. Danny, Sarah, Cole, young soldiers who had never seen real combat. But if even one child survives because of what we do tonight, then our lives were worth something. Then we become the story that the next generation tells. Then we become the myth. Danny felt something change inside him. The fear was still there, but it was smaller now. Something else had grown larger. I understand, he said quietly. Will nodded. He opened the transport door and stepped out into the burning night. Then let's go remind the galaxy why humans are still here. They followed him into the fire. Will killed the first Ravager before it even knew he was there. The creature was dragging a Kathrani child through the dirt when Will's shot took its head off. The child screamed and ran. Will was already moving to the next target. Danny, take Sarah and cover the east side, Will ordered. His voice was calm, like he was discussing weather. Cole, you're with me. We pushed toward the central shelter. The settlement was chaos. Buildings burned. Bodies lay in the streets. Ravagers moved through the smoke like shadows, hunting anything that ran. But now something was hunting them. Will move through the destruction like a force of nature. He did not hesitate. He did not miss. Every shot found a target. Every movement had purpose. Danny had trained with simulators and targets, but he had never seen anything like this. That a Ravager came around a corner and raised its blade. Will ducked under the swing, drove his combat knife into the creature's throat, and kept moving without breaking stride. He did not even look back. Contact left. Sarah shouted. .3 Ravagers rushed toward them from between two burning buildings. Danny raised his rifle and fired. His first shot went wide. His second hit a Ravager in the shoulder. Sarah's shots were more accurate, dropping 2 of them. The third reached Danny before he could aim again. Its claws swung toward his face. Then Will was there. He grabbed the Ravager's arm, twisted it at an angle that should not have been possible, and drove his knife through its eye. The creature fell. Keep moving, Will said. Don't freeze. Ever. Danny nodded, his heart hammering. They pushed deeper into the settlement. More Ravagers appeared. More fell. Will led them through the streets with terrifying efficiency, always finding cover, always knowing where the enemies would come from. The shelter is ahead, Cole said. I can see civilians through the windows. Will looked. The central shelter was a reinforced building designed to protect civilians during emergencies. At least 50 Kathrani were visible inside, mostly children with their caretakers. They were trapped. Ravagers had surrounded the building. Sarah, Cole, create a distraction on the west side. Draw as many away as you can. Danny, you're with me. We're going to open a path for the civilians to escape through the back. How many Ravagers are around that building? Sarah asked. Doesn't matter. We do what we can. They split up. Moments later, gunfire erupted from the west side of the settlement. The Ravagers around the shelter turned toward the sound. Several rushed to investigate. Will charged, he hit the remaining Ravagers like a storm. Danny tried to keep up, tried to cover him, but Will was moving too fast. He killed 4 Ravagers in the time it took Danny to kill one that a blade caught Will across the ribs. He grunted, but did not slow. He put 2 shots into the Ravager that cut him and kept fighting. Get the civilians moving, Will shouted. I'll hold them here. Danny ran to the shelter door. The Kathrani inside stared at him with huge, terrified eyes. You need to run, Danny said. Out the back. There's a path through the northern district. Go now, human, one of the caretakers said, her voice shaking. Why are you here? Your people abandoned us. Not all of us. Danny looked back at Will, who was standing alone against 5 Ravagers, bleeding from multiple wounds but still fighting. Some of us remember what heroes are supposed to do. The civilians ran. Danny covered them, shooting at any Ravager that got too close. In the chaos, he lost sight of Sarah and Cole. He could only hope they were still alive. Far away, back at the outpost, Lieutenant Ryan had finally gained access to Will's classified file. What he read made his blood run cold. This cannot be accurate, Ryan said. SYNN looked over his shoulder at the screen. His yellow eyes went wide. The file was full of things that seemed impossible. Brennan's world was there, but the details were worse than any story. Will Harding had not just survived. He had held the main gate alone for 6 hours after everyone else at his position died. He had killed over 300 Ravagers by himself. When the evacuation was complete, they found him still standing in a pile of enemy bodies, so covered in blood that rescue teams thought he was dead. There was a psychological note at the bottom of the file. Ryan read it out loud. Subject displays no self-preservation instinct when civilians are threatened. Recommend limited deployment to avoid unnecessary losses of high-value personnel. He is broken, SYNN said quietly. His mind does not work correctly. No, Ryan turned away from the screen. He works exactly the way humans are supposed to work. He just has no limits. What do you mean? We laughed at their myths. We called them primitive fantasies. Ryan's mandibles clicked with something that might have been shame. But those myths were never fantasies. They were memories. Records of what humans are capable of when they decide something matters more than their own lives. SYNN was silent. That old soldier is not crazy, Ryan continued. He is what humans become when you threaten their young. They're weak. They're innocent. He is what happens when a human decides to stop being afraid. On the screen, Will's file showed one final note. It was a quote from his psychological evaluation, something he had said during an interview. They asked me if I was afraid to die. I told them I died at Brennan's world. Everything since then is just borrowed time. Ryan made his decision. Get everyone armed, he ordered. We're going to the settlement. But Command said, I do not care what Command said. Ryan grabbed his weapon. I will not let that human die alone while we hide behind logic. For the first time, SYNN did not argue. Will could feel his body failing .3 wounds in his side. One in his leg. Something broken in his left arm. He had stopped counting the smaller cuts. Blood soaked through his armor and dripped onto the ground beneath his boots. But he kept standing. The doorway to the children's shelter was 2 meters wide. Will filled it completely. Ravagers came at him in waves, and he cut them down one after another. His rifle had run dry long ago. Now he fought with his knife and his fists and a Ravager blade he had taken from a corpse. Danny was somewhere behind him, helping the last civilians escape through the back of the building. Sarah and Cole had gone silent on the radio 20 minutes ago. Will hoped they were alive. He suspected they were not. A Ravager commander pushed through the crowd of warriors. It was larger than the others, covered in ritual scars, carrying a blade that hummed with energy. Human, the commander said, its voice like grinding metal. You cannot win. Your kind never wins. Why do you keep fighting? Will's answer came out as a whisper, but it carried through the smoke and the screaming. Because they're behind me. The commander laughed. Such a small reason to die. It's the only reason that matters. The commander attacked. Will met the charge with everything he had left. They traded blows in the firelight, the massive Ravager against the bleeding human who refused to fall. Will took a cut across his chest. He drove his knife into the commander's arm. The Ravager kicked him backward and Will hit the ground hard. Pain exploded through his broken ribs. Get up, he told himself. One more minute. One more. He got up. The commander stared at him with something that might have been confusion. You should be dead. Your body is destroyed. How are you standing? Will spat blood onto the ground. You asked why I keep fighting. Let me show you. He attacked again. This time, the commander was not ready. Will moved through his defenses like water through cracks in stone. His knife found the Ravager's throat. The commander fell, choking on its own blood, and Will stood over the body with his weapon dripping. The other Ravagers hesitated. For a moment, there was silence. Just the crackling of flames and the distant sound of civilians escaping into the night. Then the sky lit up with plasma fire. Ships descended through the smoke. Transport vehicles roared into the settlement from 3 directions. And leading the charge, firing his weapon with cold precision, was Lieutenant Rhine. The entire outpost had come. Swyanen was at the front line, his plasma rifle blazing. The Kathrani soldiers moved with deadly efficiency. The Vorn used their 4 arms to carry wounded while still fighting. Species that had laughed at humans just hours ago were now dying alongside them. The Ravagers broke. Faced with reinforcements they had not expected, they scattered into the darkness. Within minutes, the battle was over. Danny ran to Will's side as the older soldier finally dropped to his knees. Sergeant, stay with me. Will looked up at him with glassy eyes. Blood covered his face, but he was smiling. Did they make it? The children. All of them. Danny was crying now. All 400 civilians survived. You saved them. Good. Will's eyes drifted closed. That's good. Ryan reached them and dropped to his knees beside the fallen human. He pressed his clawed hands against Will's worst wounds, trying to slow the bleeding. Medic, Ryan shouted. Get medic here now. SYNN appeared beside them. The Dracorii soldier stared down at Will with an expression Danny had never seen before. It looked almost like shame. You should not be alive, SYNN said quietly. No creature should be able to take this much damage and keep fighting. He is human, Ryan replied. This is what they do. This is what their myths are about, Danny said. Not magic or fantasy. Just people who decide that some things are worth more than their own survival. The medics arrived and began working on Will. His heartbeat was weak, but it was there. Against all logic, against all calculation, the old soldier was still alive. Ryan stood up slowly. Around him, his soldiers were securing the settlement, helping civilians, putting out fires. Aliens and humans worked together without hesitation. Lieutenant, Iswayanin said, I need to say something. Say it. The Dracorii looked at the ground. I was wrong. About the myths. About the humans. About everything. He paused. I thought sacrifice without calculation was stupidity. But that man in there did not calculate. He just decided those children mattered more than his life. And because of that decision, 400 people are alive. Ryan nodded slowly. The humans have a word for it. They call it heroism. We have no such word. Perhaps we should learn one. The medics loaded Will onto a stretcher. His eyes opened briefly, finding Danny in the crowd. The book, Will whispered. Keep reading it. Keep telling the stories. I will, Danny promised. I'll tell everyone. Will smiled one last time. Then his eyes closed, and the medics carried him away. Danny watched until the transport disappeared into the darkness. Around him, alien soldiers stood in respectful silence. For the first time in his life, Danny understood what the myths were really about. They were not just stories of the past. They were promises about the future. Will opened his eyes to soft light and the smell of medicine. The medical bay was quiet. Machines beeped softly around him, tracking his heartbeat, his breathing, the slow repair of his broken body. 3 days had passed since the battle. He had been unconscious for most of them. The first thing he saw was SYNN sitting beside his bed. The Dracorii soldier looked uncomfortable, like he had been waiting for hours and did not know what to do with his hands. When he noticed Will was awake, He straightened up quickly. Sergeant Harding, you are alive. Seems that way. Will's voice was rough. Surprised? Yes. SYN did not lie. I calculated your chance of survival at less than 2%. I was certain you would die. Humans are stubborn. SYN was quiet for a moment. Then he said something Will did not expect. I was wrong. Will raised an eyebrow. About what? Everything. The myths. Your species. The value of sacrifice. SYN looked at his clawed hands. I laughed at your stories. I called them primitive. I said humans worship death because they are weak. And now I understand. You do not worship death. You worship meaning. You would rather die for something than live for nothing. SYN finally met Will's eyes. That is not weakness. That is something my people lost long ago. Will studied the alien's face. The mockery was gone. The arrogance was gone. What remained was something that looked almost like respect. Tell me about Achilles, SYN said quietly. Will blinked. What? The story from the human's book. The one about the warrior who could not be killed except at his heel. Tell me about him. So Will told him. He explained how Achilles knew he would die at Troy. How he went anyway because glory and honor mattered more than survival. How his death became a legend that inspired warriors for thousands of years. SYN listened without interrupting. When Will finished, the Dracorii soldier nodded slowly. Your ancestors knew they would be forgotten. Their individual lives meant nothing against the scale of time. So they created stories about ordinary people becoming immortal through sacrifice. SYN paused. That is not primitive. That is genius. We call it hope, Will said. The belief that what we do matters even after we're gone. SYN stood up. I need to go, but I wanted you to know something. What you did at the settlement changed how I see your species. I will not forget it. He walked to the door, then stopped. My people have genetic memory. We carry our ancestors' achievements in our blood, but we do not carry their choices, their courage, their sacrifice. SYN looked back. Perhaps that is why we stopped believing in heroes. We never had to become one. Then he was gone. Later that day, Danny came to visit. He brought his mythology book, the cover now bent and the pages stained with smoke from the battle. The others want me to read to them, Danny said, sitting down beside Will's bed. The aliens. They keep asking about the stories. What do you tell them? Everything. Beowulf, Odysseus, Leonidas, Thor, and the giants. They listen like children hearing bedtime stories for the first time. Danny smiled. SYN asked me to read the part about Beowulf fighting the dragon 3 times. Will laughed softly, then winced at the pain in his ribs. Good. Keep reading. Keep telling them. Sergeant, can I ask you something? Go ahead. Danny hesitated. Do you really believe one person can change the universe? Will was quiet for a long moment. Through the window of the medical bay, he could see stars scattered across the darkness. Billions of lights, billions of worlds, an infinity that made any single life seem meaningless. I have to believe it, he finally said, because sometimes one person is all there is. Sometimes you're the only one standing between the monsters and the children. And in that moment, you're the entire universe for the people behind you. Danny nodded slowly. He understood. That night, Alliance Command tried to bury the incident. They classified all reports, deleted all communications, and ordered everyone involved to remain silent. The ceasefire was too important to risk, but someone had recorded the battle. Someone had captured footage of 4 humans charging 200 Ravagers to save alien children. And someone uploaded that footage to every public network in the galaxy. Within hours, it was everywhere. Every species saw the same images. The old human soldier standing in a doorway, bleeding from a dozen wounds, fighting until reinforcements arrived. The young human reading mythology to alien troops who listened with new respect. Other species started asking questions. What were these stories humans carried? What made them willing to die for strangers? What kind of species treated sacrifice as something beautiful rather than something wasteful? On a dozen worlds, aliens began searching for human mythology. They read about Achilles and Beowulf and Leonidas. They read about ordinary people becoming extraordinary through choice rather than birth. And slowly, Quietly, they began to understand that a month later, Will received a classified report that had been leaked to him by someone in Alliance intelligence. It was a Ravager assessment document, marked at the highest security level. Revised threat assessment, the report read. Humans are not dangerous because of their strength or technology. They are dangerous because they genuinely believe in things worth dying for. This belief appears to be universal across their species and is transmitted through cultural stories called myths. These myths should be considered priority targets for psychological warfare, as they appear to be the source of human resistance to calculated defeat. Warning: do not underestimate humans in defensive scenarios involving their perceived dependence. They will not retreat. They will not surrender. They will continue fighting until they are physically destroyed. Will set down the report and looked out the window. Somewhere across the galaxy, Danny was reading stories to soldiers who had once laughed at humans. Somewhere, SYNN was learning about heroes for the first time. Somewhere, a child who had been saved from the Ravagers was hearing about Beowulf and wondering if she could be that brave someday. The myths were spreading, and humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy was not technology or strength. IT was the simple, stubborn belief that ordinary people could become legends, point one choice at a time.